Hello and welcome to our first From the Trenches in 2024. Happy Tuesday. I saw in the comments there that people in South Carolina are under a tornado watch right now. So we're praying for you that doesn't happen. Pray for your protection there. So welcome again to our From the Trenches here in January. Our title today is The Music Ministry Dilemma: How to Raise Leaders Without Lowering the Bar. My name is Angie Glendenning. I'm a regional guide for DR USA, and in that role, I work with priests and parish leaders across the US to help them keep momentum going with their parish renewal in their own parishes. It is an absolute joy to do the work that I do, and it is a real joy to be with you all here today. So as we get started, a lot of you have obviously been with us before and are following the promptings of everyone else in the chat and are entering where you're from. So we appreciate that. As you're entering where you're from in the chat, let's get topical with our topic today. And why don't you also pop in the chat something you're listening to these days? What's some music that's inspiring you? Might be a song or an artist or an album that you're listening to. I don't know if people actually listen to albums anymore, but whatever is inspiring you musically, why don't you pop that in the chat and let's see what we're all listening to. Maybe we'll get some new songs for our playlists here. I'm not very cutting edge with my music. I tend to listen to the same things over and over again, but my husband and I are really into Matt Mayer's The Lord's Prayer, It's Yours. Whenever that comes on the radio now, we turn it way up and get pretty pumped up. So that's my contribution to the discussion. So it's great to see so many of you from different places here in the chat. Before we get too far into the discussion, let's lift up this webinar and our topic today to God in prayer. So if you would all join me in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Lord, we give this next hour to you. We thank you for our speakers. We thank you for our guests and for every guest here on the call. We give you praise and thanks for the ministry that you have called us to, for the church that you have given us to help us follow you. We ask that you inspire our thoughts and our words today with your wisdom. And as you prompt us with your wisdom and give us clarity in the steps we should take, please give us the courage to take them. Inspire us, fill us with your Holy Spirit. We give this next hour to you and ask for your blessing upon it in the name of Jesus, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. These From the Trenches webinars that we've been doing every month are such a joy for us here at Divine Renovation because we're all passionate about parish renewal, and we love connecting with others that are equally passionate about the renewal of our church. Divine Renovation exists to inspire, connect, and equip parishes on the journey from maintenance to mission. We are a global ministry that dreams of parishes being places where people regularly encounter Jesus. Over the past few months, we've been journeying through our key elements of parish renewal, this pyramid. We started in September talking about vision, and we just most recently wrapped up our discussion in December talking about culture and developing a culture of generosity. The recordings for all of these past webinars that we've done are available on our YouTube channel. There's a playlist for all of our From the Trenches webinars, so you can find all of these ones that are up here on the slide at that link that was just put in the chat. So this month we arrive at strategy. And we need to be strategic in so many areas of our parish renewal, across the whole parish. But we've chosen to really zero in on this topic of music. I'm going to bring on Kurt Clement now, who's going to join me on this discussion. And Kurt is the executive director of Divine Renovation USA. And Kurt, of all the topics that we could choose that have to do with parish renewal, and there are many, why is music such an important discussion for us to have in parish renewal broadly?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, music, we're reflecting around how we've really never addressed the topic of music, but it is so important, the power of music to inspire or to deflate, the power of music to inspire faith deeply in people. But we also know the experience of the power of music to it can be painful, to diminish faith versus inspiring faith. And so it's such an important topic. And I think, sometimes it's because there's a lot of theological and liturgical implications. It sometimes can be controversial, divisive in the church. So today we're not going to get into any debates about musical styles or appropriate instrumentation in the Mass. So I hope everyone is okay with that, okay? But we are going to talk about the role of music in parish renewal. And I think it's important to point out, too, that there's a section in the book Divine Renovation where Father James does a beautiful job of talking about the importance, the role, the impact of music in parish renewal. Of course, in the first third or so of the book, there's a lot of the theology of evangelization and principles of renewal. But there's a section where he gets really practical, starting on page 95, where he talks about giving priority to the weekend. And there's a section on hospitality. And then there's a section on page, I think it's 110 here, that talks about uplifting music. And he really goes deeper. He talks about the old and the new. He talks about beauty and excellence. Talks about things like the primacy of praise, knowing your audience, and song selection. And there's a lot of really good practicals that have always been very much influenced our ministry and a lot of the parishes who connect with Divine Renovation. So definitely encourage you to read or reread that book. So
Great. So part of our discussion today is around one of those principles that Father Mallon talks about, which is the value of excellence in music, right? Not, as our title suggests, not lowering the bar of what we're hoping to accomplish with our music. But if that was our only goal, we'd be having a much different discussion today than we're going to be. As the title of our webinar today suggests, we also want to focus on how to raise leaders in music while not sacrificing the excellence that we're striving for. Why is that an important part of our discussion?
Yeah, well, I mean, the topic of leadership, when we're talking about parish renewal, leadership is always on the forefront. This idea of the empowering of the laity. It's not just up to the priest and a few religious professionals, but leadership is about the empowerment of the gifts within the body of Christ. And that includes music. But I think because music is such a unique specialty in the life of the church, we often don't think of or apply leadership principles in the same way. And we can often leave it to the specialized professional few. But the reality is, I think our churches are filled with people with various musical gifts that need to be engaged. And so, it's just a good reminder to bring the topic of leadership into music, because, leadership is, whether or not we have the title of a leader, like a director or a coordinator or a music ministry leader of some sort. But if we're a leader, our primary role is actually on empowering others. That's the primary task of leadership, and not just doing it ourselves. It reminds me of a famous quote by the leadership guru John Maxwell, and he says, "He that thinketh he leadeth and hath no one following is only taking a walk." He's that leading, but if no one's following, he's only taking a walk. So it's essentially saying a person might hold a position of leadership, but might not actually be leading, because leading is about having followers and working with people and empowering others. And so, we think about excellence. We could have excellence just by limiting music to one or two professionals or hiring professionals for special liturgies. But music ministry leaders aren't called just to be excellent in themselves, but are called to be leaders who empower others to be excellent and to multiply and minister through other people.
Right. So we're talking about this tension, right, that I think we all can feel. And it's not exclusive to music ministry, but there is this tension of excellence in music, and then this call that we have as leaders in the parish to raise others up. And we, I think, naturally have this perception that those two are at odds with each other, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think on this webinar, what we're trying to do is to hold up excellence as a value, like it says in the book Divine Renovation, but also empowerment, or let's just say maybe multiplication as another word, as these are both critical values that need to be embraced. And I would say probably this whole webinar for me was inspired by a book called Hero Maker. And there's a section in this book, Hero Maker, that talks about the dynamic between excellence and multiplication. That, once again, is kind of the basis of the conversation today. And in the book Hero Maker, he talks about multiplication in the arts or in music ministry. And he says this in the book. He says, most artists or music leaders feel they are stuck in a tug of war between excellence and multiplication. If you focus on excellence, you trust only a few very talented artists, and you never multiply or develop anyone else. But if you focus on multiplication, you develop lots of new artists, and in the process, excellence suffers. So that's just one quote in the book here. And he goes on to say that if you have to choose between excellence and multiplication, you will lose. The congregation will lose, young emerging musicians will lose, and the mission of Jesus will lose. And it talks about how there's a false dichotomy that you have to choose between the two. And I think that's what we're going to bring to the forefront here. Let's not, he uses the image of a tug of war versus riding a bike. That instead of excellence and multiplication being working against each other like a tug of war, the authors speak about the pedals, two pedals of riding a bike, the pedal of excellence, and then the other side, you have the pedal of multiplication. That if you do it right, they can work together like riding a bike and can increase momentum for both. So just the last thing on this book, and then I'll come at the very end with a few practical takeaways. But he says, the pedal of excellence will attract artists, while the pedal of multiplication will develop more and better artists. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of what we're going to unpack with our guests today. This whole idea of excellence and multiplication. So, Angie, I know we'll bring you back on at the end, and so thanks for getting us started here. So I'm excited to transition and invite on our guests today to hear about music ministry in their parishes and how they, as leaders, empower the gifts of music in the community while still striving for excellence. So I'm going to bring on Chris Cisanto. from St. Anthony of Padua in Vancouver, and also Kelly Burns from Ann Arbor, Michigan, from Christ the King Parish. So welcome, Chris and Kelly. Now I have to just say real quick, if any of those are in the United States, knowing Kelly lives in Ann Arbor, where I have to just do a big shout out to the University of Michigan. Congratulations on the national championship last night. So I didn't know if Kelly would make it to work if the town was shut down. So congratulations, University of Michigan. Everybody in Canada was like, what? What are you talking about? So anyway, so yeah, Christ the King is in Ann Arbor. So yeah, why don't you start off, Kelly? Just introduce yourself. Yeah, just your parish, the role you're in, and how long you've been there.
Sure. If I'm yawning a lot, it's because I was up late. So that's what that's about. Yes, so we're in Ann Arbor. We're a charismatic parish, so we have a special designation by our bishop as charismatic, which makes us kind of pretty unique, from most parishes. It means that we have kind of like a dispensation or an allowance to use the charismatic gifts during liturgy even. And I have been here, this is my, this is my 4th year, so 3.5 years. And yeah, did you want us to tell more about the parish or just?
Yeah, maybe just that's good for start, just kind of the parish you're at and how long you've been there. What about Chris? What about you, Chris? How the parish, your specific role and how long you've been there?
Yeah, so my parish is St. Anthony of Padua, Marpole. It's one of 2 St. Anthony's in Vancouver, actually. I'm the director of music, and I've been in my role for just over 4 years now. My anniversary was on Christ the King. And yeah, this is the parish I grew up in, and I am blessed to serve.
Right, and your pastor, Father Justin, and I'm a Father Ed, Christ the King. So great priest that we've worked with in different ways for many years. So maybe could you just share a little bit more about the overall vision of music ministry in your parish? You've talked a little bit about style, Kelly. I mean, anything else to add about the style? How many masses? I mean, sometimes parishes do different styles at different masses. Some have it more consistent across all the masses. So should you share a little bit about how you approach that, your vision of music, and how many people do you lead that are a part of your music ministry?
Oh, sure. So yeah, style wise, so I guess we have 3 masses on a weekend. And we have about 1,400 people coming every weekend. We're pretty contemporary heavy, but we have a real blend. I mean, we do traditional, we sing Latin, we do chant, we do English, we do kind of a broad spectrum. Like we'll have a song by Thomas Aquinas and also Brandon Lake maybe, or Matt Maher in the same liturgy. Our masses are all the same, so we don't have like a specific style to one mass versus another. Everybody does the same plan, generally in the same way. In terms of vision wise, we're a very singing parish. I've never been to a parish that sings more than Christ the King. They love to worship. So we're really focused on participatory and just really like what does our assembly sing really well, and that's what we want to do. Did I answer all your questions? Boy,
yeah. Well, and share a little bit. I mean, because I did go to Christ the King a few months ago. I was so impressed. Wow! But not just the participation, but how many empowered musicians you had.
Oh,
I was actually at a mass that had a lot of young people, but the excellence was it was at a high level of excellence. So maybe we can dig in the specifics of how you do that. But how many people do you lead within your music ministry?
Sure. I would say we have probably like around 80 people. 80 to 85 is a little bit nebulous because my numbers include tech volunteers. So including our tech volunteers, we have about 100. So we're in the probably 80 to 85 range of musicians. So
wow, it's beautiful. So you as a leader, your job is to empower, support, recruit, train, empower 80 to 85 people. That's awesome. And Chris, what about you? Just your overall vision of music and what leadership looks like.
Yeah, so St. Anthony of Padua has 4 masses over the weekend. There are about a little bit over 50 to 60 people who sing at the masses, and I also have a few more that do music affiliated things outside of the mass. And the overall vision of the music ministry, I mean, I've always been called to have the mass at the center of everything. So I would say that my overall vision for all the choirs is to first fully immerse themselves in the mass, and then to serve in that way and kind of glorify God and leading the congregation in that way, and almost like directing their prayer and making it pointed. And yeah, so I'm in charge of 50 to 60 people. We have 2 music directors who I work with, who I talk to frequently, and yeah, 60 choral singers.
Oh, great. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So you have a couple people that are your key leaders, that kind of the supporting structures for training in the 60 and helping support the music ministry. Now, Chris, do you at your parish, do you have where maybe certain masses are more traditional and one maybe has a contemporary mixed in, where it's maybe different at masses, or like Kelly, where kind of consistent throughout, and at each mass there's a blend of all styles?
Actually, it's the exact opposite of Kelly's church. Every mass is different because of the choirs. One of the first things that I decided to do was I wanted to really provide as much different kinds of music to meet parishioners where they're at in terms of spiritual journey, musical orientation. So we do a contemporary mass, which is full of praise and worship, and that has insane participation. But we also have like an extremely traditional mass. A lot of it is in Latin. We do it ad orientem. A lot of the singing is participatory, but most of the communion stuff is not. It's like motetti, polyphony oriented, 6-part, 8-part stuff. And we do have that balance of having a style per mass, because the idea is to kind of allow people to make that conscious decision of what helps them pray the best. So we do have different masses.
Well, it's cool to hear just the different models, really. What's the vision and what's the kind of strategy for different parishes. I think those are two. Some might have, a contemporary and a traditional, some sort of blend of those in separate masses, and some others where there's an integrated approach across all the masses. So once again, that's not the topic of to debate those points, but I think you both do it really well and with excellence. And that's the main thing, So one of our core beliefs for leaders is that God has given gifts to the people in the pews, and that our job is to draw out and empower people to use those gifts, across the parish. What do you see? You see potential when you look out in the community, and the job of leadership is to draw out and empower that potential. However, I could see how some like truly professional musicians might struggle to be sort of music snobs. I mean, I don't mean in a bad way, just truly like you're used to operating at a certain level, and might struggle to work with people who don't have certain levels of musical training, But and this is the thing about this is I'm not a musician, so I'm excited to hear from you. But I also see where, like, I have a 15-year-old daughter who's in high school, and they go through rigorous training and coaching and perform at a super high level. And I know there's people young and old that do have really cool gifts. So I guess, what are the opportunities that you see as you look out at your parishes? What are the opportunities you see around being able to identify people in the pews and who can contribute at an excellent level? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think the first question, we're always asking like who, like where are they? When I got here right at the beginning of COVID, so May of 2020, and so that was really a question because we weren't even having masses at that point. And so I think my strategy is always, I don't actually do really a lot of recruitment or any at all. My strategy is usually that I find like a really good core. Like, so for example, I know like I'm a fair, good enough musician, and my husband also sings with me, and he's a great harmonizer. So if it's only the two of us, it'll be great because we sound good together and we can worship well together. And so to find a really good core and just start there, and then what has happened is that people just come on, they're like, oh, that's cool, that's good, I want to be a part of that. And then I would say like the second piece of it is like I kind of see like music ministry a little bit, at least at Christ the King, as a puzzle. We have, I didn't explain this before, but we have like rotating music teams. So we have a couple handfuls of music teams, and they rotate on a every other week basis at the different masses. And so I'm always like looking at a person who comes to me or somebody points them out, and I'm like looking at it with an eye of like, where does this fit in the puzzle? Like what is this person's real gifts? What are they really good at? Where are they maybe need some growth? And like, what's the perfect place to put them? Because I want to put them in a place where they feel really supported and where they can be successful. And so that's kind of like always how I'm building the program, is just piece by piece, little by little, how do I put this together that makes sense?
And would you say that part of that puzzle is that there's musical opportunities that maybe aren't liturgical or aren't at mass, that might be an opportunity to develop somebody or kind of get to know their gifts better, that
Sure.
might then would invite them to take a next step in leading at mass, for instance? Is that a part of the puzzle, is how you see non-liturgical musical opportunities?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, we have a lot of events here, and some of them are like kind of like sort of liturgical, some of them are not. You know, we have prayer meetings, we have youth group, we have retreats, we have outside events. So there's certainly a lot of opportunities to get involved. And definitely I also think like you do have to have kind of a, I mean, we all know this, like kind of a basic, like I have a basic set of expectations. Like anybody who's serving at mass needs kind of like this, they need to at least this, you know, because it's a lot, like to sing, to play, to do a whole mass. I think people don't realize like maybe the music isn't necessarily hard, but it like that putting it all together and like presenting it well and for the whole mass is difficult and rigorous. And so I think there, yes, I'm always looking for like ways to kind of like scaffold people in. Like another example is like I never ever compromise on a piano player. Like I don't need them to be like able to play at Carnegie Hall, but I need them to be really like have really great tempo and really be able to play with an ensemble. And I have some younger piano players who are getting there, but like maybe they're not ready to carry the whole mass. And so I'll put them on the keyboard supporting, like they'll like play chords, they'll play a couple of songs on the piano, and they're with this team and they're growing and they're learning. And then before you know it, they're able to play the whole mass, you know. So just figuring out ways, little pieces, bite-sized, to kind of scaffold them in.
I love that. It's really beautiful. Just your heart for how to support people and bring them along. And Chris, what were your thoughts about that, or what would you add?
I mean, I absolutely agree. I think one of the first things that that me and my boss, my lowercase b boss, talked about, especially with music, is that people are drawn to excellence. And it's really important to kind of have that as your focus piece when you're empowering people to serve and inspiring them to do more in the parish. I don't necessarily even need to do recruiting, because I get so many people asking me to join the choirs because there's such a focus on kind of excellence and performing well. I think especially with aptitude, depending on the mass and depending on the kind of music, there definitely has to be a baseline, like Kelly was talking about, and just having a baseline, because it's difficult for a choir to perform well and to pray well at mass if, let's say, someone is absolutely tone deaf, right? And that is just it may not be their charism. You know, like we have a bunch of programs outside in St. Anthony's and outside of St. Anthony's that identify charisms and the best way people serve, and kind of like identifying that and using them to your advantage is very good. So it is very much like a puzzle. When people do ask me to join the choirs and I audition them, one of the first things I ask them is, what music do you pray best to? Because I think, to me, that's way more important than what mass fits your time schedule, which mass do you go to, kind of thing. Because if you're not praying at mass, and if you're super, super stressed, then you're not praying. I've had people I think super early on, like my first year, we we sang a piece that was so hard. I think someone was crying because she was so stressed about the piece. Um, it was my sister. Uh, um, but I never want that to happen again. And I learned that so early on that the mass has to have so much precedence, and that kind of frames the entire way I deal with kind of placing people in the correct mass and kind of utilizing their gifts and their charisms to the fullest.
Yeah, yeah. That's beautiful. I love that question of what type of music, what helps you to pray, or that's a great question. So just kind of even some of the things I heard you guys say stood out to me. One is when you think about multiplication, excellence and multiplication, it seems like it starts with excellence. Excellence attracts excellence. And so, I mean, I think this applies to any leadership in the parish. We don't raise up volunteers by bulletin announcements and in-the-mass announcements. Hey, come on, come on. I mean, we how we identify people's gifts is more than that. But I think it starts with having a certain level of excellence that does attract people. I love hearing about your scaffolding. I mean, these are all things that in traditional leadership, we would talk about I see in you conversations. You would talk about apprenticeship. You would talk about creating leadership structures and things like that. I also really liked how you guys both talked about how being able to communicate a certain bar of what is needed. I don't know if you could share a little bit more about that. So well, you touched on that, Kelly, like to be able to lead piano at a mass, there's a clear threshold that you need to be able to operate into. Are there any other examples of what that looks like to set a bar that just does kind of filter out people who aren't going to be able to perform at the necessary level of excellence?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I'm very picky on like my pianist. I am now we have like other, flute players, violin players, things like that who play with us. I'm picky with them in a different way. Like if you play with good tone and good intonation, you can play the right pitches, they're not flat, and you have good tone, you sound good. I can do a lot with you. Like you might be a really bad sight reader, or you might not know how to improvise, or whatever, like you might not be good at counting. I can work with you if you have those basic things, so I kind of like just need to know like where can I compromise, like what am I willing to compromise on and what am I not. If your tone is poor and you're out of tune, I am not going to compromise there, because it takes away from the worship experience. And like singers, for example, like if you don't read music but you have really good tone, like I can work with you, I can teach you how to read music. I can, we can work with that. So just knowing like what you're willing to give, where the give and take is, I think is really, really crucial.
Well, it's different with it sounds like, as a non-musician, it sounds like it's different with every even like instrument or voice and even style of music. I mean, I've heard people over the years who are praise and worship leaders who were never trained formally, but they're excellent at leading worship. And so it sounds like you have a certain modified threshold. And I love also, Chris, how you said, if you can lay out a threshold and kind of just know that of what excellence looks like, if people come along who aren't able to operate at that level, you're still working with them knowing they have gifts. Let's try to find out where we can use their gifts. Whether it's not in music or it's at a music that's in a non-liturgical, you're still there for people and you're still trying to empower them. This just might not be a good fit for them. And so it's a really personal investment in people, it sounds like.
Right. I mean, like the goal, because I find the love for service so extremely beautiful. It's how I got roped into everything, to be very honest. And just like that has to be honored. And like I would do anything to make sure that you can honor that, because if that's your way of loving Jesus and that's your way of committing yourself to Jesus, like who am I to say you can't do that? Like there's so many other opportunities. We have a thriving hospitality ministry. We have lectors. There's so many opportunities to serve and to give your life to Jesus. And definitely with the aptitude and kind of the bar line of excellence, I think it definitely, like you were saying, it does depend on the style of music. I'm going to call it praise and worship mass, but in my contemporary praise and worship mass, even though I arrange everything into like 3-part gospel-ish things where you are reading music, I think the most important thing is that you have vocal clarity so that you can lead the congregation efficiently. And that is something that's important, because if you're not leading them, then they can't follow along, they can't sing along. But for the more traditional mass where it's really heavy on reading, really heavy on tuning, there is a little bit more aptitude that we have to do. And it's not like we're not going to work on it. That's what rehearsals are for, right? We're always working on intonation, onset, breath control, posture, just everything under the moon. But there definitely has to be a baseline, and it depends on kind of where you stand with your choir and kind of how your choir is doing.
Yeah, I love your guys, both of your passion for excellence, but also your just heart for people and empowering people. And yeah, it's really just beautiful to hear you guys reflect on your leadership. Could you share a little bit more about what are some of the, like, when you think about leadership, somebody already mentioned about supporting people, how you develop people. Like Kelly, if you have 80 people, I mean, it can't be just you directly working with 80 people. You've got to have some processes and structures for how you break people into groups and support them. And I think, and you as well, Chris, can you guys share a little bit about just more about your structures for being able to empower that many people?
Sure.
Kelly, yeah, like having so many amazing young people being so excellent, like that doesn't happen. That happens through some intentionality. So yeah, just share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do really interact with all of those 80 people. But like kind of the structure of how we run things is that, like, so for our music teams, for example, there's a worship leader. There's somebody who's in charge of the team, and it's not always me. Sometimes I lead a team, but we have a bunch of other, like 7 other teams. And so we come together on Wednesday nights for all the 3 teams who are going to play on Saturday and Sunday. And I run that rehearsal. So I'm leading all of those people, the team leaders and all the rest of the participants, in that Wednesday night rehearsal. We're talking about technique. We're talking about the flow, like how are we doing? How are we making a transition? What are, I'm running them through all of that. And then on Sunday, when they come, their team leader is running that rehearsal. They're running the warm up and they're leading them through the mass. And I'm there because I'm there to support them and, offer suggestions and advice. But I largely just sit back and let them lead, and I follow, or I'm not playing at all. And I just, okay, we need to fix this one thing, or, just jump in when necessary. So I think the key is knowing, like, when to step in and when to step out, and being, like, really thinking that through and really strategic about it.
Well, I hear you saying you have teams and team leads, which is amazing. And you're probably going to connect with the team leads to empower them to lead their teams at the rehearsals. I mean, that's just beautiful leadership. And I thought it was also interesting to hear about how you rotate and you have a team. So maybe the 10 a.m. mass, it's going to alternate between weeks of when people are serving, and you're breaking them down into teams and spreading it out that way. That's really, really cool. So Chris, anything you can add about, like, the kind of structures you have in place for empowering that many people?
Well, I do have people who direct their own choir, so I don't direct every choir. But as I was praying about leadership and kind of raising leaders, I had this thought, I think, one morning, where being a leader in music doesn't necessarily mean you're the director of music. Like, for example, one of my values is fostering a beautiful community. So one of my directors, they rehearse after the mass, and they all have dinner together. They have board game day, they have ice skating day or whatever. And they're fostering that community. Similarly, at other masses, we try to spend a lot of time outside of the mass, fostering that kind of religious community. I always encourage people to join life groups, to join faith study, to join Alpha, kind of building that spiritual connection with each other. And these leaders end up popping up. You can see people who have a strong heart for service, a strong love for other people. And these leaders are not necessarily directors, but they are so intentional in their kind of praise in the mass and outside of the mass that people are empowered by that. And I think that's really important to note because, for example, I can think of so many leaders in my choirs who are not the director of choirs, but they always inspire me to pray because just watching them be fully present is inspiring and it's edifying to see that. And kind of always encouraging spiritual growth is something that I feel like is always going to be a positive.
I love that. So beautiful. Like, well, so a couple things. I'm just trying to process. There's so many nuggets of what you're saying, so I'm trying to like grab on to ones that, at least that I'm hearing. One is, it sounds, so you also have teams and leaders of teams.
Yes.
And I think you even have a couple that are paid a stipend or paid something. But I think it's important, though, you're not just paying them to just go be the experts doing the music. You're paying them, you're giving a stipend because they're professionals, but you're giving them a stipend to lead people, to lead and raise up others. And so you're hiring them to be a part of the ministry leadership team, not just to be performers. I think that's the important thing, whether or not we need to pay a person a stipend or not. And the other thing that you're speaking into that is so important is a lot of people in a parish, their primary contact and experience will be the ministry that they engage and serve in. And so you're also passionate and have a heart for the discipleship opportunity that you have for all of the people as they engage with your music ministry. And so you're working with your leaders to help prayer and to grow in their faith and have a certain, you almost have like discipleship small groups through your music ministry, it sounds like, Chris, as we've talked before. So I love that heart too, and that just concrete way that you're discipling the people who are coming forward and using their gifts through the music ministry. So really beautiful. I think we've got a lot of questions. I've been so focused. I haven't really been following the chat, although I got a couple messages that we've got a lot of burning questions here. So Angie, can I bring you on and let's bring in a few questions from the chat.
Yes, so this has been a great discussion. Thank you both for bringing your wisdom to the table. But there are quite a few people on the call who are from smaller parishes. So I don't know if you guys have any experience in this, but let's hypothetically, if you did, put yourself in a smaller parish. And Kelly, you kind of talked about this at the beginning, right? Like even if it's just you and your husband playing, that you have that core. But there's two aspects here, I think, that are coming up. One is, how do you strive for excellence when you might not have a huge pool of people with the talents to come forward? And if I can throw a second caveat on here, because these are both the two main themes I think that are coming through. So maybe just to think about the second one too as you're answering. You both mentioned that you have auditions. What happens if someone doesn't meet the baseline? Like, have you had to tell people no, and how do you do that? So I don't know who wants to tackle that one first, or which one you want to tackle first. But Chris, do you want to go for it and see?
I'll give Kelly a break because I've just been saying I agree with her the entire time. So, sorry. So let's do the auditions first. So I do auditions. The audition depends on which choir you're auditioning in or for. And I think it's really important that your core value is that they're praying well. They're praying well at Mass, but they're also but there's also a level of standard that you're trying to adhere to. So transparency is extremely important. Like, for example, if someone were to audition for my contemporary music Mass or my contemporary Mass, and they struggle to follow a tune, or if I were to sing something, they struggle to sing it back, or they take time to adjust, I would talk to them, but I'd also kind of gauge how anxious they look while they're doing it. Because if they're going to be anxious like that at the Mass, it'll be even worse for them, because I think that'll stop you from praying, that'll stop you from being able to devote yourself to the moment. And just being transparent and explaining all these things, kind of explaining your guidelines and your principles of what is important. Like, I would phrase it as, oh, it sounds like you're struggling to follow along. You have a beautiful voice, but I can see that you seem concerned about projecting well, especially when you're not familiar with the tune. And then I would phrase everything that way, and then I would also talk to them about, is there any other ministry that you'd like to serve in? So giving that other option is really important, because it's not just a rejection, It's more, is there a better fit for you? Because everyone should serve, I think.
Thank you. Kelly, do you have anything to add to that about letting people down gently?
Yeah, you know, I audition people, but I don't often have to say no. And I think the reason is, like, I don't often get someone who's tone deaf who comes to me for an audition. I think part of it is that I'm very clear on the front end of, like, here's the expectation. We have rehearsal on Wednesdays. Here are the call times. Here's how we run Sundays. You know, just like kind of laying out, like, this is exactly what I expect. Like, oh, you're not in high school yet. Okay, so I need you to keep practicing. I need you to, like, and so just never compromise. Like, I never, like, if you come to me and you're like, oh, I really want to sing, but I can't make Wednesday rehearsals, well, I'm gonna say no. And like, so just never compromising on those things that I'm really, really think are important. And sometimes that just does the work for me. Like, people, like, they want to sing, but they're not sure if they're talented enough or they have the skills. And like, they kind of just like they get a little information, and then I think they realize, like, I'm not sure this is for me, or I'm not sure I'm ready to commit, that kind of thing. It usually just works it out. But also, I generally, like, I can do something with you. Like, if you are a vocalist and like you have, and like, I can probably work with you. So again, it's like having that eye of, like, what makes sense here? Like, oh, I think you need to be in like a choral ensemble because there's a little more support than being in a small music team where it's one person per part per microphone, like, so just really, really trying to think about, like, what makes sense. Or like, I had a pianist audition for me who, she's been playing piano. I mean, she's much older than I am. She's been playing piano her whole life, but it's different to play in an ensemble than to play piano on your own, and she's not quite ready for that, but she could accompany the rehearsals for the children's choir, which I needed an accompanist, so like, where can you fit? Like, just really thinking strategically. I often don't have to say no. I mean, sometimes you do, but and then to the question of small parishes with not a lot of people, I think you would be surprised, actually. Like, I think it's twofold. Like, it's really important to know your own skills and what you're good at. Like, what am I good at? Where can I coach people into growth really well? And what am I not? And who's in my community that could help? Like, is there a college nearby? Are there, like, voice teachers anywhere? I mean, you would be surprised. Like, did somebody in your parish study music or play in an orchestra? Or there are probably people who have skills that I don't have. And so trying to reach out and, like, figure out who those people are and how to get them, kind of networked in, I think is really key.
Yeah, Chris.
I did not even answer that first question, and Kelly totally reminded me. I didn't even talk about smaller parishes or.
Oh,
No,
yeah, that's
yeah,
okay.
no, I
You had
mean,
something?
yeah, I do. No, I just wanted to say I absolutely agree. I think having someone who is just who has a musical baseline is really good to kind of have a standard, kind of have someone who's been in the know to give you kind of a baseline on how things should sound. But at the same time, I would also say, even with a smaller community, like, I've led workshops on how to read chant, how to read neumes, kind of how to do chant well. And I always find that there are super simple hymns that can be done beautifully, and it's way better than doing something really hard, mediocrely, if that makes sense. And I think kind of always reassessing your flock or your choir and kind of doing what is capable and kind of improving from there is always going to be important. And having that baseline is definitely required for that.
I just want to, like, totally agree with that point about, I always like to think of it as, like, the Goldilocks rule, like, I don't want anything, just because sometimes we as musicians get so excited about music, we want to do awesome stuff, and it's more about us than it is about, like, how is this going to be received and prayed with at the parish level. And, like, I don't know, like, last year, maybe Holy Thursday, we were doing this piece and it just did not sound great. And I was like, we cannot do this. Like, it would be about us if we did this piece. So I pulled it and we did something simpler and it was beautiful, you know, so like, what is that just exact right fit so that it always sounds beautiful?
Mm. Well,
That's
I think we would probably not have any time, but since this question's from Father Patty, our great friend, he has the question, it's kind of along these lines. How do you value and intentionally develop, engage the most important musical group, the congregation, the people at Mass? You know, how do you get people to be more participative? Any thoughts about that? We'll wrap it up. Chris, why don't you start off?
Okay. 100%. I think congregational participation is super important. I know that this can vary between parishes. I know a lot of parish communities that really, really, really value intentional silent prayer, or even like pointed prayer where they're not engaging, but they're just immersed in kind of the ambience of the Mass, kind of like the kind of how you preface everything and kind of sound almost like soundscape the entire Mass with the music. And there are people who really value participation. To answer that question, particularly at St. Anthony's, we use screens. So we have 2 TV screens. And what I've been doing is for all the Mass parts, all the notes are on the screen so you can read if you can't read. And definitely focusing on songs that are what I would like to say sing-alongable. And what that means is, especially with music, like for example, at our contemporary Mass, I intentionally do the chorus like 5 times because it allows people to catch on, it allows people to engage, and doing it over and over again, and also cycling through music. Even though I try to choose music that is pointed, that is like based off of the gospel, based off of the homily, based off of the overarching parish theme or parish mission arc, reusing a music and doing it well every time allows the congregation to participate more. And every time they do it, they become more and more engaged. And that's kind of your goal, is to have them be more engaged and being intentional about that and making those choices.
Yeah. And it's interesting to point out that Chris's parish, you heard him talk earlier about how they even have Mass ad orientem once a month. So, you
3
know,
times
it's
a
a
month now.
very traditional element there you see at the parish, but they also have screens. They're an interesting blend between the two. And Christ the King, for that matter, you can't put them in a box either, right? There's a praise and worship history, but there's the tradition of the church and the music richness that is there. Kelly, anything you can just add about just eliciting participation through your music leadership?
Yeah, I always like to say, give the people what they want. So like, and what I mean is, like, what are the songs that our people sing really, really well? And it's not the same for every parish. You know, the things that work at Christ the King are not the things that I did at my last parish. And so getting to know the culture of your parish and what are the songs that, like, when you play them, they worship, they sing, you hear them, identifying those, and like maybe like the characteristics of those songs, but even just building in enough of those to support anything else that's going on. So like, I always want to end communion at Christ the King. We always want to end communion with like full out praise. So we usually do like 3 songs at the communion rite, and the middle one might be like, or one of the first 2 might be a little less of that, but like we always want to end with like, we are all in this together, you know? And so just really getting to know the culture of your worshiping community and like what really works, and just put the winners in whenever you can, you know?
Wow, man, so much gold here. And Angie will share a little bit more in a minute about just continuing the conversation on our Facebook channel. For now, I just want to thank you, Chris and Kelly. I mean, I couldn't be more impressed with you guys as young leaders in the church and how well you can articulate this important topic. So thank you for being our guests today. And I hope we can find a way to continue to give you an opportunity to support others and be a part of music leadership. So thanks again for joining us. And I'm gonna share just a few thoughts. I just kind of prepared 3 things that came to mind. Kind of want to call it today 3 takeaways from our session today, and then we'll turn over to Angie for a few announcements. 3 takeaways around music leadership that I just came to me, and I'm going to share them. First thing is lead with vision. when we're talking here about music and leadership in music, raising up others, leadership, and leaders lead from a place of vision. So I think it's important as leaders in music to just reflect, where are we going? You know, we define vision as that picture of the future that produces passion in people. Well, what's the picture of the future of where you're leading people to? You know, begin to write it out. You know, pick a date in the future. Well, how about in 5 years? January 2029. I dream our music looks like this, feels like this, how it inspires, how it impacts people, but also your vision for empowerment and multiplication. And so just do that work of just trying to write down and think and reflect and pray about your vision that you're trying to lead people to. And I think it's also important to share that vision with others, and especially your pastor, you know, because the vision of music can't just be, you know, bound up within one person. It's a part of the community, and particularly the pastor. So I think to have that kind of conversation around the vision of the parish and the vision of music. The second practical kind of takeaway is to identify an apprentice. You know, have somebody who you're intentionally investing in is always a great principle of leadership. You know, being able to have a sense of like, I'm working myself out of a job. And you might not, I mean, you're going to work yourself out of a job so that you can do more in other areas, but always trying to invest in others so that we can, like, have you ever heard of the school bus test? The school bus test is, if a leader of a ministry were to be hit by a school bus, would the ministry continue to thrive at the same pace with or without them at the helm? So we always want to have a sense of like working to be able to pass the school bus test. And one great way to do that is to identify an apprentice. And then the third thing that I just want to leave you guys with from this webinar is to be a student of leadership. Music leaders. I know we have a lot of new people on our webinar maybe that are music leaders who haven't typically connected with us. But just become a student of leadership, you know, commit to leadership development. Leadership is something that is learned. If you're thinking, I'm not very good at empowering others, I'm not very good at all that, you can learn it. You can definitely learn it from other people like Kelly and Chris, but you can also learn it. There's a great resources. I would say start with the book Hero Maker. You know, there's a whole section on leadership and multiplication in the arts that is really excellent and practical. So commit to your leadership. Those are just kind of three takeaways that I was thinking as we kind of brought our discussion to an end. I want to bring back on Angie, who has a few announcements, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you, Kurt. Yes, that was those great thoughts to end it with, and what fantastic guests we've had. Kelly and Christopher were amazing. So thank you all for joining us on this discussion today. We hope it's been helpful, enlightening. I know we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully enough to get you thinking and have some new ideas to try. We would love to see the discussion of this topic keep going. In the chat right now, you should see a link to our Facebook group. You have to request to join, but we have people waiting right now to actually give you entrance so that you can get in there and start discussing with us. You can post questions that we could actually take to our guests and get some answers back for you if you like. So if there's any discussions you guys want to have, keep the conversation going, join our Facebook group right now and post those questions around parish renewal in general. We want this to be a place where we can talk about parish renewal, not just about music, but about anything. Next month, we're going to be coming back with our topic around tools and processes. So this is going to be our final one that we hit on this key elements of parish renewal. We're going to be talking about our preferred tool for communal evangelization, which is Alpha, and what are some of the traps that can keep us from seeing the fruit that it could bring to our parishes. There are temptations and pitfalls that we've seen trip up many parishes as they're trying to run this tool effectively. So we want to talk about those. We're going to do that on Fat Tuesday, February 13th. So join us for that. If you want to have a conversation about any of the challenges or opportunities that you are experiencing in your parish as a leader, and you're not sure what next steps you might want to take, we are here to support you. Please reach out and schedule a conversation with your regional guide. Courtney and I are here on this call for Canada and the US. You can reach out to us, but no matter where you are in the world, we have a regional guide that you can connect with. So if you visit this website on the screen, and in your chat, you can find out who that regional guide is, and you can schedule a call with us, and we can talk about some of those first steps that you can take to renew your parish. And finally, for any priests on the call or any priests that you know who are seeking renewal for their parish, we have coaching available at no cost to them. Our first coaching experience is called Kickstart. We go through 6 basic topics about what parish renewal is. And it's coaching in small groups of 6 pastors together, 6 priests together. We have a few of these small groups that are going to be starting over the next month. So if this is something that you're interested in, now is the time to reach out and get into one of these small groups. So don't miss that opportunity. That was a quick run through. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your ministry. We look forward to engaging with you on Facebook, hopefully, and at our webinar next month. Happy New Year, all, and thank you again.